the 9th edition iteration of Codex Adeptus Mechanicus sees some massive changes to its fundamental design. Many of these changes are very exciting and take inspiration from both older versions of the faction, even back to its birth, all the way up to meshing with some very modern 9th edition concepts that's going to make for some extremely exciting and, most notably, different changes from what the army is right now. Thanks so much to Games Workshop for sending us this advanced copy of the Codex so we can give you guys this content day one and let you know what's up. Let's take a look. So there's about 4 major changes in the Codex that fundamentally change the way that you both organize and play it. Let's talk about them. First of all, we have this concept that I like to think about as the separation of church and state. At the initialization of this army several years ago, the Scutari and the Cult Mechanicus were actually 2 separate books, 2 separate armies that could only be played together with the use of the War Convocation, which was an infamous battalion that came out in White Dwarf. And what it did was it actually meshed these 2 armies for the first time since they actually came out. Of course, in newer versions, we saw these 2 be working together much more closely. Everyone benefited from Canonicals, things like that. Now, we see the separation exist once again. And let me tell you what happens with that. The Canonicals are no longer army-wide. They now only affect the Cult Mechanicus units in your army. This is very much the way it used to be, so they did not affect any of your Scutari units, things like that. In addition, the Canonicals are now no longer able to be rolled for. You simply pick one at the start of the battle round and you go through them. There are a couple ways, of course, where you can actually select one to put on a specific unit, things like that. We're going to be going into more depth onto the actual Canonicals in a future video. But for now, we want to talk about the big changes, which is the fact that they actually no longer affect Scutari and you can no longer roll for them. Now, of course, if the Cult Mechanicus are affected by the Canonicals, then do the Scutari just lose out? Do they have anything to replace it? They do, and this is where one of those older concepts comes back into play. They now benefit from Doctrina Imperatives. Doctrina Imperatives, as you imagine, are essentially Canonicals, but only for Scutari. They consist of a 2-part ability. Each turn, or each battle round I should say, you pick an ability just like Canonicals, and all Scutari are affected by them. They gain an optimization effect, and they also gain or lose from a deprecation effect. Now, the optimization naturally is a buff, while the deprecation effect is a debuff, and both are effective at the same time across all the Scutari in your army. There is one way to actually negate the deprecation effect, but once again, we'll take a look at that in a future video. Each of these harkens back to the age before, where you could buff certain ballistic skills, nerf the weapon skill, and vice versa. Makes for some interesting play that doesn't have cross-pollination between your Canonicals and your Doctrina Imperatives. So that's the first 2 big changes. Canonicals are only affecting Cult Mechanicus. Each of them fundamentally changed. Many of them have been improved upon, and a couple of them just scrapped, which is probably for the best. And the Doctrina Imperatives now introduced once again, affecting Scutari units, giving them simultaneously a buff and a debuff. Now, one of the other big changes to the book is a change that many people have been looking towards ever since the release of Psychic Awakening. Psychic Awakening introduced the ideas of the different orders within the Adeptus Mechanicus, something that's common to the lore, but was only introduced to the game for the first time in that book. The way it worked in Psychic Awakening was you would be able to pick a Warlord trait that would associate one of your tech priests, this could be a Dominus, tech priest engineer, whatever, with one of the given orders of the Mechanicus. This was a Warlord trait that actually consisted of 3 sub-Warlord traits that you would get to pick which one was active at the start of each turn or battle round. Incredibly powerful abilities. They later on made it so you could only take 1 in your army, but still, they were so pervasive, so powerful that there were some that you would never not see in every Mechanicus army. So what have they done with them now? I actually really like this change. What they've done is they've switched them from being Warlord traits to essentially the format of chapter command that we've seen in many of the other books, where there's simply a points upgrade for a given character. So an exciting different change. You get more of them within your army if you'd like. They cost points and not command points. So that's exciting. And they've also changed in the way that they work. We will of course discuss this further on in a later video, but the long and the short of it is they are now a 2-part trait. You start in effect with 1 part and then you can switch to the other one later on. So they're much more limited in their use The abilities are extremely powerful, but some of the key ones that we're looking at, we're of course talking about exploding sixes in a bubble, are fundamentally changed. So this is a great change, lets you still have your Warlord traits, lets you take these different specializations that will have big effects on your army, but I think it's a great new take on this ability to actually put your tech priests into one of the given orders that we know so well from the lore. The last big change I want to talk about briefly, of course, is the changes to all of the Forge World abilities. The number one thing to think about is the fact that there is no Forge World with less than 2 abilities, right? We're seeing this paradigm in many of the 9th edition codexes, where you have not 1 ability but 2 abilities, in some cases 3, for example Metallica, which remains the same. And let me tell you, all of these abilities are really exciting. There's only maybe 1, maybe 2 stinkers of Forge Worlds overall. They before suffered greatly from having just a couple of the Forge Worlds be very, very optimized as far as their Forge World abilities, and the other ones had maybe an interesting stratagem, interesting Warlord trait, but they just couldn't compete with these big ones. And so this change to adding more abilities to each of them, tweaking them around, making them all interesting is a really exciting change. So these have been the biggest changes in the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex. Of course, if you'd like to find out more information about each of these topics in specific, we have videos coming out. You can check them out, and we're going to take a deep dive into each of these big topics. But starting off playing the new Adeptus Mechanicus or fighting against them, these are the things that you want to know on day 1 of the launch. Of course, if you found this video useful and interesting, do like and subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, you can further support the channel by becoming a member today and hitting the join button just down below. We're really excited about the release of this new Adeptus Mechanicus Codex. It's going to be a really exciting and fascinating army to play, and so I can't wait to play them next time on the Tabletop.